"What are you doing here?" A dumb question thrown at an elderly black man who was just reading a book. Walter looked up, calm. "I'm reading, like I do every afternoon." But to that cop, a black man sitting alone was already suspicious. No crime, no noise. Still ordered to leave the park in broad daylight, because he didn't look like the rest, because he dared to exist. "What state are you in? Does justice still come in shades where you live?" Drop a comment, silence is complicity. The afternoon settled gently over the small neighborhood, like a soft velvet cloth draping everything it touched. The air, fresh after an early rain, carried the mingled scent of earth, leaves, and the first crisp winds of early winter, bringing with it a strange sense of peace. The rustling of old leaves, the whisper of wind slipping through branches, and the golden sunlight filtering through the canopy made time feel as if it had paused. In a quiet corner near the end of the park, Walter L. Browning, a man well past 70, sat silently on his usual spot, bench number 3. His face bore the deep lines of time, creases around his eyes, weathered skin, a head of white hair. Yet in his eyes, that had seen so much, there remained a calm resilience, and something rarer still, a steady light of kindness that refused to burn out. Mr. Walter was a teacher, or more than that, a symbol, for generations of students who had passed through his classroom. Over 40 years of teaching, he didn't just teach facts, he taught people how to live. He had taught in underfunded inner-city schools, places where prejudice, stigma, and systemic barriers weren't in textbooks, but showed up every day in the eyes of children, the words of parents, and the silent assumptions built into every policy no one dared name. But he never gave up. He taught those kids that dignity wasn't tied to where you came from, that every voice deserved to be heard, that difference was never a reason for exclusion. In every classroom, he created a space where even the poorest, loneliest child could feel like they mattered. That was why he earned respect, not for his titles, but for the quiet impact he left on each student's life. Though he'd been retired for years, he still kept to old habits. Every afternoon, he left his weathered wooden house, book in hand, a thick volume filled with underlines and handwritten notes in tiny script. He carried a thermos of black tea, its handle cracked from age. His steps were slow but steady, as if each pebble beneath his feet were an old friend. He passed the rows of maple trees, crossed the small wooden bridge over a dry creek, and arrived at bench number 3 under the old oak he called his natural ceiling. There he read, sometimes novels, sometimes history, sometimes poetry. The yellowed pages turned slowly beneath his thin fingers, but now and then he stopped reading. He simply sat there, hand resting lightly on the page, eyes gazing at the slanting rays of light as his mind wandered back to old days, to students' laughter, a worn-out lectern, and a time when he still believed education could heal a broken society. The kids in the park liked him. They'd pretend to play nearby, but really they were listening. One might ask what he was reading. Another would beg to hear the story of the turtle and the eagle, an African folk tale he had once shared. To them, he wasn't just an old man. He was a keeper of magic stories, a calm presence in a world that spun too fast. And just like any other day, he made his way from his old house to the park to continue those stories. He scattered some crumbs on the ground. A small sparrow hopped onto his palm and pecked gently at his open hand. He smiled, saying nothing, a faint smile, but it caught the morning light. His gaze drifted toward the winding path that led out of the park. A soft breeze blew by, carrying the scent of dry leaves and a faint jasmine aroma from a nearby garden. A middle-aged woman walking by nodded at him. He nodded back. No words were needed. That was enough. Enough for the day to begin, not with headlines or traffic noise, but with the quiet presence of someone living life on his rhythm. On the bench beside him lay a worn, leather-bound copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, an old book he often reread, as if somewhere in those familiar lines he could still find answers to today's questions. Why do people still judge each other for being different? Why is justice something we have to argue for? Why can a quiet old man reading a book in the park be seen as a threat? He turned a page. The slanted type under morning sunlight seemed to whisper something from the past. But he didn't start reading again just yet. He looked around at the kids riding bikes in the distance, an old man walking a small dog, and a young couple pushing a stroller. Everyone was caught up in their world. No one paid him any mind, and truly, he didn't need to be noticed. He just needed to be left alone. But elsewhere in the park, a pair of eyes was watching him. She didn't sit nearby. A white woman in light athletic gear, hair tied back, stood beside a tree across the path. She didn't move, just stood there, arms folded, staring at Mr. Walter. Maybe she found it odd. An elderly black man sitting alone in a park. No phone, no headphones, no gadgets. Maybe something about that seemed off to her. Strange, even. And just a few minutes later, as Mr. Walter continued to scatter crumbs for the birds, the woman pulled out her phone. An older black man is sitting alone in the park. I'm not sure what he's doing. Looks suspicious. That was all it took. No crime, no broken rule. Just a look, a judgment, a phone call. On bench number 3, Mr. Walter knew none of this. He was still sitting there, shoulders slightly hunched, frame thin, book in hand, eyes following the birds as they chirped and flitted. To him it was just another ordinary morning. A rare pocket of peace in the day, a moment when the world still had room for silence, for people who'd done nothing wrong, but simply didn't fit. But that peace was about to be broken, not by shouts, not by violence, but by the familiar sounds of a system that's been left unquestioned for far too long. The wail of a patrol car, the thud of boots on pavement, and the command to show your ID, spoken even when all someone was doing was sitting still. The sparrows kept hopping around him, but somewhere overhead, a hawk had already begun to circle lower. The patrol car appeared like a dark streak sliding through the morning sun. Its lights swept across the narrow path into the park, casting red flashes onto the old oaks lining the trail. The sound of tires crunching slowly over gravel rang out, cold and sharp in the quiet air. Not loud, but enough to make a few pedestrians turn their heads. On bench number 3, Mr. Walter still sat, gently scattering the last crumbs onto the ground. The sun cast his shadow long across the grass, wrapped in a ring of sparrows chirping and flitting around him as usual. He had no idea that this peaceful morning was about to be split in two by prejudice and authority. The car door slammed. The sound of police boots hitting stone echoed with a dry finality. The officer approached, tall, broad-shouldered, walking with the kind of weight that seemed to crush any resistance in his path. His uniform was crisp, his gun visible at his hip. On his chest, a silver badge caught the sunlight. Peter Carson. The moment Carson saw Mr. Walter, his eyes narrowed. No greeting, no basic courtesy was shown to an elderly citizen. Just a hard stare, as if Walter were a stain on something clean, and Carson had been sent to scrub it out. "What are you doing here?" Carson asked, voice dry as a report. Mr. Walter looked up. He met the officer's gaze not with fear, not with defiance, but with a strange calm, as if this question had visited him 1,000 times before. "Feeding the birds and reading. How long have you been here?" "Same as always, about an hour," he replied gently, then nodded at the birds still chirping. "They know my schedule better than a clock." Carson didn't smile, didn't soften. He glanced around the park, then stepped closer, as if Mr. Walter might leap up at any moment. "We received a call. A suspicious black man was seen near the playground. You match the description." The air seemed to tighten. The birds startled and flew off. A few walkers slowed down. Somewhere a phone camera clicked on. No one spoke, but the atmosphere had changed. Mr. Walter pressed his lips together. That sentence, he'd heard it all his life, but it still hurt every time. "I've been sitting here, not threatening anyone, just reading and feeding birds. The playground's 50 meters that way," he said, pointing. "I didn't go near it." Carson frowned. He didn't reply. Instead, his hand brushed his radio. It wasn't a shout, but a show of force. He didn't need to raise his voice. The way he stood, hand near his gun, chest out, chin up, was warning enough. "I need to see your ID." This time, his tone wasn't procedural. It had weight. The kind of voice people learn to obey, knowing refusal might lead to something worse. A flicker passed over Mr. Walter's face. He studied the officer closely for a long moment. Not out of fear, but disappointment. "Officer, may I ask why? Have I done anything suspicious? Have I broken any law? I'm not obligated to debate. I'm responding to a report and following protocol. Or, are you checking because I'm sitting here with this skin color? Walter asked slowly, eyes never leaving Carson's. Carson froze just for a second, but enough to show the shot had landed. Don't make this harder than it has to be, he said, each word clipped. Mr. Walter let out a quiet breath like a man who'd been expecting this moment. He opened his wallet, pulled out an old, worn ID card, the edges frayed, the print faded, and handed it over with both hands, slowly, like a ritual. Not because he feared misunderstanding, but because he was used to having to prove his innocence, just for existing. Carson took it, looked at the name, and the address just down the block. No violations, no reason to escalate. But still, he wasn't satisfied. All right, but you should leave. Some people in the neighborhood feel uncomfortable with you here. That sentence didn't explode, but it still pierced dignity like a silent bullet. Mr. Walter looked at the officer longer this time. His eyes were heavy, not with fear, but regret. Regret that after all these years, a black man sitting quietly in a public park could still be seen as a threat, just because he wasn't white. Uncomfortable, he repeated. So now we define justice by someone's feelings, not their actions. You can ask me to leave, officer, but don't tell me it's for justice. This is fear dressed in uniform and given legal standing. A heavy silence settled over everything. The wind stopped blowing. The leaves stopped rustling. Carson took a step back. He said nothing, gave no reply. He snatched his radio, muttered something unintelligible into it, then turned and gave Mr. Walter a sharp, blade-like glance, before repeating slowly, but with unmistakable pressure, "You need to leave. I hope you understand." Then he turned and walked away, face calm with a flicker of quiet satisfaction, like a man who had just checked off a task on his to-do list. Mr. Walter didn't move right away. He stood still, book in hand, watching the officer's figure disappear behind the trees. Then he turned and walked back to the bench. The birds were gone. The park felt colder. The birds were gone. The park suddenly felt colder. But in the distance, a teenager had recorded everything. He hadn't stepped in, hadn't shouted, but his eyes stayed on Mr. Walter, as if he had just witnessed something much bigger than he yet understood. The video lasted less than 3 minutes, but it was enough, because after that morning the whole neighborhood and Officer Carson would have to face what they'd long avoided. Justice isn't the absence of trouble. It's the presence of people who refuse to bow their heads even when all they're doing is reading and feeding birds. When Carson disappeared behind the trees and his footsteps faded into the stillness of morning, Mr. Walter didn't leave right away. He stood silently by the bench, eyes fixed on the long stone path. The wind returned, soft as a sigh, carrying a few dry leaves that brushed past his worn-out shoes. A beam of golden sunlight broke through the oak leaves and fell across the bench where he always sat. Same spot, same old book, same thin hands holding a cup of black tea, but inside him a different wave stirred, not anger, not despair, but a deep, quiet sadness, flowing from a distant corner of memory just disturbed. He sat back down, but didn't open the book. His hand tightened slightly around the handle of the teacup, his gaze fixed on the empty air ahead, but his mind was already leaving the park, returning to much older days. Around him, birds had started chirping again, signaling the morning was well underway, but time seemed to pause for Mr. Walter. Behind his foggy glasses, his eyes no longer saw the present but were watching something else, a series of days as faded as old paper in a dusty library. This park, this bench, had once been a place of rest in his twilight years, but this morning it had become a bridge to a journey back through memory. The memory of a teacher never fades with time. His first classroom in the West Side had only ceiling fans, no air conditioning, a stained blackboard, and wobbly wooden desks passed down through generations. The children there grew up with cigarette smoke, violence, and poverty. They didn't care about the future because the present was already too heavy. Sometimes he wondered, has anyone ever said something kind to these kids? Memory is like an old room in the mind, locked for decades, but all it takes is a sound, a glance, and the door swings open, vivid and alive as if it were just yesterday. Over 40 years ago, when Miss Walter stepped into that classroom as a young teacher, he carried a brown leather bag, a few books, and a heart full of hope. The high school he was assigned to was in the poorest part of the city, a place where students came to class not because they dreamed, but because staying home was more dangerous. On his first day, a boy named Leon, frizzy hair, cold stare, always squinting like he was ready to fight, sat in the back, threw a pen at Mr. Walter's desk and said, "You think we're going to listen to some black guy in a white shirt?" Leon smirked, but his eyes held something else, unease, like someone used to being rejected, judged. His friends laughed and clapped, not because it was funny, but because it felt like a win. To them, every new teacher was a test, a battle, and someone like Mr. Walter, quiet, calm, without threats, seemed like an easy target. Back then, racism crept into every corner, even among people of color. A young black teacher leading a literature class was unusual. Most people still believed only white men were fit to teach literature. Someone like Mr. Walter, if not coaching sports, then maybe fit to be a hall monitor, at best. But Mr. Walter didn't respond to Leon with anger. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from empathy. He had once been another Leon, in another school, with a teacher who chose to believe in him instead of punishing him. The way he bent down to pick up the pen was a silent message. "I've been you, and I know you can be more." Then he looked straight at the boy and said, "If you don't listen to me today, I'll be disappointed, but I'll still teach, because I believe one day you'll want to hear what I have to say." The kids didn't understand. Some laughed. But Mr. Walter knew. It was the first time anyone had spoken to Leon that way. No yelling, no threats, just believe. For 2 years, he taught those tough students with a patience even he didn't know he had. Some days it rained, water flooded the classroom floor, chalk wouldn't stick to the board, and students arrived soaked to the bone. Sometimes angry parents shouted at him, saying, "Don't feed them dreams, just teach them how to survive." Still, day by day, the students' eyes began to change, from defiant to curious, from distant to quietly attentive. Some days he came home with ink-stained shirts, chalk dust in his hair, and exhaustion clenching his chest. But each morning he returned to class and wrote the first line on the board in careful script. "We don't study to become someone else, but to understand who we are." Bit by bit, the students began to change. Not all became model kids. Not every class was quiet, but they started to listen. Not because they had to, but because they felt respected. Leon, the boy who once threw a pen, began sitting closer to the front. One day, he brought Mr. Walter a handwritten poem on scrap paper. "The fish locked in a glass jar isn't weak, just unloved by those who won't believe it can swim far." The poem didn't rhyme. It wasn't polished, but it carried a longing to be understood, the kind of feeling no one expected from a boy once full of anger. Mr. Walter didn't ask how Leon wrote it. He just knew that if a heart could write that, it had begun to believe in itself. He read the poem, said nothing, and gently patted the boy's shoulder. It was one of the most meaningful moments of his teaching life, not because the poem was great, but because the boy had finally seen his worth. Some students he no longer remembered by name, but he remembered their eyes, the way they looked at him when they realized they mattered. Some became mechanics, barbers, or soldiers. Some lived far away, but when they returned to the city, they'd pass by the old school. Some stood from afar, too shy to say hello, just bowing their heads to the old classroom, where they once heard a teacher say, "You deserve to be heard." And a few, now successful, came back to stand at the school gate, quietly staring into the past, not to see him, just to remember what it felt like when someone finally believed in them. Mr. Walter never bragged about what he did. No interviews, no speeches, no awards, but he knew he had planted seeds, and somewhere, some of them had bloomed. The wind passed through the park again. He remembered the officer's cold face, not violent, but far from kind. That sentence wasn't just a warning. It was an echo of all the suspicious glances he'd lived through. People don't feel safe seeing an old black man sitting quietly in a park, he wondered. Then he smiled softly, because that kind of injustice no longer had power over him. Mr. Walter slowly closed his eyes. Memory stirred once more, bringing with it the sounds of an old classroom, chalk on the board, the scrape of chairs, awkward laughter from students finally understanding a lesson. And then that laughter faded, replaced by the cold voice of the officer from that morning. Someone didn't feel safe with you here. He opened his eyes. Above him was a pale blue sky, branches swaying gently, and a few sparrows had returned, hopping around his feet. He smiled, a thin, kind, quiet smile, because he knew prejudice never fully disappears, it just changes shape. But he also knew this: with every year, every child, every lesson, he had helped make the world a little less cruel, and sometimes that's enough. The police station sat at the end of Pinewood Street, a cold, gray, unremarkable building tucked behind a line of iron fences and rusted antenna towers. Hundreds passed through it every day, and each day brought another round of dry reports filed and forgotten. Today was no different, at least not for Carson. The middle-aged officer walked in through the side gate, his police jacket lazily slung over one shoulder, fingers tugging his muted radio off his chest like he'd just completed something important. Sweat still clung to his temples, but his face carried a smug satisfaction. To him, what had just happened wasn't a problem. It was a clean takedown. Inside the break room, a few officers sat drinking coffee. The air was thick with the scent of burnt plastic and watery brew. Carson dropped into a leather chair, propped his feet on the table, and started talking before anyone asked. This morning, some old black guy wouldn't leave the park. Someone called in saying they felt unsafe. I showed up, checked his ID, and told him to move. Done, another officer, Blake, big, bearded, loud, laughed out loud and thumped his mug onto the table. Still wasting time on harmless types, huh? People these days get spooked by anything, he said, then looked at Carson. You got him to leave? Of course. Carson nodded, lips curling. He was old, sitting there like a statue. Probably thought being black and elderly meant he deserved respect. I gave him one sentence, and he knew to get moving. Laughter followed. Not loud, not raucous, but unmistakably approving. A younger officer stood by the file cabinet nearby, silent until now. His name was Leon. He'd been on the force just over a year. He'd joined to protect the community, believing the job was a righteous path. But the longer he served, the more uneasy he became. This morning, the moment Carson mentioned the old black guy at the park, something in Leon's chest tensed. What did he do? Leon asked, unable to mask his curiosity. Carson turned to look at him, half smiling, half wary. Nothing, not yet. But someone felt unsafe. That's enough to check. We don't wait for bad things to happen. You get that? Leon swallowed. He'd heard this logic all year, but each time it made his gut twist like he was being forced to digest something rotten. He was really that old? Leon asked again, slower this time. Yeah. Ancient. Looked like some old schoolteacher or something. Carson smirked. Had that moral look in his eyes, but I've seen that type. The older they get, the more they think society owes them. Leon stayed silent, but the word schoolteacher triggered something like a file pulled from a locked drawer. He remembered 9th grade vividly. Back then, he'd been the kid everyone called lost cause, cursing, fighting, stealing, even cutting power to the classroom to avoid class. He hated school, hated teachers. Most of all, he hated the way people looked at him like trash, until one day they got a substitute, an older black man plainly dressed who didn't raise his voice or scowl. He just stood at the front of the class and wrote in white chalk, "I'm not here to fix you, I'm here to listen." Leon had scoffed inside. Listen to what, he thought. But over the days that followed, he noticed something. That teacher never punished, never shouted, never glared. When Leon skipped class for 3 straight days, the man showed up in his housing block, knocking on doors until he found him, and said only one sentence. "Leon, you don't need to act tough to be seen. You've always been seen." That line stayed with Leon for years, through graduation, through police academy, through the promise he made to himself never use his badge to bully the vulnerable. Now, hearing Carson talk about the old black man in the park, something in Leon twisted hard. Could it be Mr. Walter? He wasn't sure. But the way Carson talked about him with casual disdain, treating his removal like a small victory, made Leon feel sick. Carson kept talking. Cases like this, you shut 'em down quickly. Show who's in charge, people fall in line. And what did the higher-ups say? Someone else asked. Carson shrugged. Who's got time to care about stuff like this? Nobody died, nobody sued. Log it and move on. Brass doesn't want the drama of racial emotions. Best to clean it up and keep it quiet. Leon turned away. He didn't say more, but he knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. That evening, he went online. Scrolling through social media in a haze of unease, his eyes stopped on a video titled, "Police Tell Elderly Man to Leave Maple Grove Park." It was 2 minutes and 38 seconds, shot from afar on a phone. But it was clear, Mr. Walter, seated on the bench, hands trembling as he handed over his ID. The look in his eyes, it was the same look from years ago. Leon knew it was him, and for the first time in years, he felt a cold kind of anger. Not just because Mr. Walter had been mistreated, but because this happened too often and never seemed to stop. But this time, he wouldn't forget. This time, he would begin documenting. Every action, every reaction, every word. Carson had no idea. But that day in the break room, a seed of resistance had taken root in a young officer's mind. Quiet, not immediate, but undeniable. And it would grow into something Carson couldn't stop. A truth that would be remembered and would not stay silent. The sun had risen but remained veiled behind a thin layer of clouds. The entire park was bathed in soft light, like an unfinished pastel painting. Birds chirped gently, their sounds occasionally mingling with the distant hum of passing cars. Young leaves swayed above, signaling the arrival of a new day, but for Mr. Walter, it didn't quite feel like a fresh start. He had come back. Bench number 3 was still there, solitary but familiar, like an old friend quietly waiting. In one hand, he held a cloth bag with the same book he had read more than a dozen times. In the other, a paper sack with breadcrumbs, the morning ritual for the birds. But today, his steps were slower. Not from age, but from the heaviness in his chest. Since the day Officer Carson ordered him to leave, something inside Mr. Walter had cracked. Not completely, but enough to make him question the quiet belief he had held for decades, that the world, slowly, was getting better. It was a small faith, but persistent, and though he had told no one, this morning he had nearly decided not to return to the park again. But just as always, when the light slipped through the curtains and the birds woke him at 6:10 like a biological clock, he found himself putting on his shoes, buttoning his coat, and stepping out the door as if pulled by an invisible force. Maybe he wasn't ready to let go, or maybe he just needed to know how much longer his heart could endure. Across the park, Leon walked slowly. He wore no uniform, no badge, just a thin black jacket and jeans. He looked like any ordinary person out for a stroll. Hands in pockets, eyes scanning the path ahead, as if searching for something he wasn't sure was even real. For 3 nights since watching the video, Leon hadn't slept through. He tossed and turned, haunted by the image of the elderly teacher sitting quietly on the bench, the image replaying in his mind like an old reel of film. And more than that, it was the memory of a time when Mr. Walter was the only adult who had ever looked at him without judgment. He didn't know if he'd see him again. But today he came to the park, not by order, not by duty, but for one simple reason. He needed to see him. As he turned past the trees, Leon froze. In the distance, on bench number 3 beneath the old oak, sat a familiar figure. Silver hair, a thin but upright posture, hands holding a book. Even from afar, Leon knew. It was Mr. Walter. In that moment, something warm rose in Leon's chest, a feeling both joyful and overwhelming. He stood still, then slowly approached. Mr. Walter was flipping a page, eyes lost in the words, though his mind wasn't truly reading. "Sir?" The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, enough for Mr. Walter to pause. He looked up. Leon stood before him now, a grown man, tall, strong, but with the same earnest awkwardness in his eyes that he had as a boy. A moment of surprise passed. Then a soft smile began to form on Mr. Walter's face. "Leon?" he asked, as if unsure whether memory had just stepped into reality. Leon nodded, eyes bright. "Yes, I'm your former student. I wasn't sure you'd remember." "I remember." Mr. Walter smiled gently. "You were the one who wrote poetry on the wall behind the classroom. Freedom isn't something given. It's something we hold on to when others try to take it away." Leon laughed a light, relieved laugh, like a child being forgiven. "I didn't think you'd remember that." "An old teacher forgets names," Mr. Walter said softly. "But the things students write out of anger and hope, that stays in the heart." There was a pause. Then Leon sat beside him, no asking, no invitation, as if they'd never been apart. He looked at Mr. Walter's hands, thin, wrinkled, but steady. His hand rested on the book just as it used to rest on a student's chest years ago when they couldn't yet believe in themselves. "You still come here every day?" Leon asked. "There are some things," Mr. Walter replied, "that if we stop doing, we start forgetting who we are." Leon was quiet, then spoke again, his voice lower. "That day, I know what happened. I saw the video. I heard what Carson said back at the station. I'm ashamed I didn't speak up." Mr. Walter didn't reply immediately. The wind moved through the trees, soft and steady. A sparrow landed near his foot, peering up as if waiting for a crumb. "My son," he said gently, "silence can also be a form of pain. But if you choose not to stay silent, then you've already begun to change." Leon turned away, eyes stinging. He didn't know why he was so emotional. Maybe because forgiveness had come too easily. Or maybe because, in all his years as a police officer, this was the first time he truly felt there was someone worth looking up to again. "You changed me," he said. "When I was a kid, I hated the world. But you were the first proof that not everyone wanted me to fail. And now," Mr. Walter looked at him, "you are the proof that I didn't teach in vain." Two men, two generations, two very different lives sitting on the same old bench, looking up at the pale sky. They didn't need to say more. In that moment, everything had already been said. The wind stirred again. The birds returned, hopping around their feet. And there, in that quiet park under the old oak tree, between two people once lost to each other in the current of life, an unscheduled reunion delivered something this world has grown short on: hope. House number 22 on Elm Street had been sold just 2 months ago. White brick facade, neatly trimmed lawn, windows dressed with floral curtains. The neighbors were still whispering about the new resident, Martha Grover, a woman in her mid-50s who had moved in from another state, living alone with her chihuahua, Daisy. No one knew about her husband or whether she had children. Everything about her was a mystery. That day, as she walked Daisy through the park, Martha's eyes stopped at bench number 3. An elderly black man was sitting there alone, reading a book. A small bag of breadcrumbs rested beside him, and a flock of sparrows fluttered nearby. Martha felt uneasy. Not because Mr. Walter did anything, but because he didn't. His silence, the way he sat still, not smiling, not looking at anyone, made her label him as hard to read, and in her mind, hard to read meant dangerous. She stood at a distance, watching carefully. Then she pulled out her phone. Her voice was calm as usual, but beneath it was a quiet certainty that she was doing the right thing. "I'd like to report a suspicious person in the park. He's sitting alone on a bench, which looks odd. He's black, elderly, not sure what he has on him. I don't feel safe." She hung up and continued walking her dog as if nothing had happened. No guilt, no hesitation. In her mind, it was a reasonable precaution. As evening fell, streetlights flickered to life along the roads. Mr. Walter sat on his porch, holding a cup of cold tea, eyes fixed on the distance. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the hedge nearby, but he barely noticed. The conversation with Kyle still echoed in his mind, playing over like a slow spinning tape. That calm lasted only a few minutes before a sharp, abrasive voice cut through the air from behind the short fence in front of him. "What are you doing out here? Trying to scare someone?" Mr. Walter looked up. It was the new woman across the street. She wore a bright red robe, a crooked baseball cap, and held a half-burned cigarette. In less than a week, Martha had become known for her nosy, loud remarks, and especially for the way her gaze hardened whenever it landed on him. "Just getting some air, ma'am," Mr. Walter replied, voice calm, like he was speaking to a child. "Getting some air?" She took a drag, then blew smoke in his direction. "I knew it. Wherever these people hang around, trouble follows. This neighborhood used to be quiet until you started loitering on that porch, sitting there like you're watching people." Mr. Walter stayed silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he had heard this kind of talk all his life. Those words were an old song, tired, repetitive, the kind no one wants to hear, but that keeps playing anyway. But Martha wasn't finished. "I see you walking through the park every morning, hanging around the kids. Who knows what you're looking at?" That hit like a slap. Not just insulting, but cruel. Mr. Walter set his tea down and stood up. He was slight, his back slightly hunched, but something solid rose in his posture. "What did you just say?" he asked, voice low and steady. "You've never greeted me. Never asked me a single question, and yet you assume I'm a threat because of my skin color?" Martha let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please. I'm just stating the facts. The world's full of criminals. I just want this place to be safe. I have every right to be cautious, to ask questions." "Cautious?" Mr. Walters stepped down from the porch, eyes locked on hers. "I taught for over 30 years. I've helped raise generations of children. One of them is a police officer. Is that who you call suspicious?" She hesitated briefly but kept her tone firm. "You may fool the kids, but not me. Brown skin is still brown skin. I've lived in Georgia my whole life. I know what kind of people bring trouble." Mr. Walter's heart sank, not out of pain, but pity for a mind so full of fear and ignorance. Still, she continued, "I'm going to report you to the neighborhood board. We can't have an old man sitting around the park every day, creeping near children. I've got pictures of you near them. I'll make sure you're forced to leave." Mr. Walter gave a faint smile, not mocking, just bitter, as if every ounce of patience in him had finally worn thin. "And what's your proof? That I read books? That I smile at passers-by? That I remember the students who once called me father?" "I don't need a sermon," she snapped. "Don't think being old means you can say whatever you want. I'm filing a report first thing tomorrow." Just then, another voice cut across the street. "That's enough, Martha." It was Leon. He stood by a streetlight in full uniform. His face was stone. His eyes were sharper than ever. "I just walked my old teacher home. The man who saved me from the very kind of prejudice you're spewing." His voice rang clear, each word driving the truth home. "He's the kindest man I've ever known. If you think he's the threat, then maybe you're the real danger." Martha froze. For the first time, she visibly lost her composure. "You're a cop. You're supposed to be on the people's side. You're not supposed to take sides." Leon took slow, deliberate steps toward her. "I stand on the side of justice, not hatred. Not with eyes that only see skin color." Silence fell across the neighborhood. A few people peeked from their doors. A child on a bike stopped by the gate to watch. Martha shrieked, "This is ridiculous. Everyone's gone mad. I have the right to live here without feeling threatened by—" "No one's threatening you," Leon cut in. "But if you can't live with kindness and respect, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." A quiet wave moved through a neighborhood that had long kept silent. Mr. Walter said nothing more. He looked at Leon, not as a student, but as a grown man who knew when to stand up for what was right. Then he turned, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. His heart felt lighter, even as the wind outside began to rise. Maple Grove rarely saw major storms. But that day the sky seemed to collapse. From early morning, clouds had thickened above the neighborhood, and by noon, wind howled through the trees, tossing trash bins down the sidewalks. The storm arrived faster than forecast. Residents shut their doors and scrambled to secure what they could. Rain poured like buckets from the sky. Thunder cracked overhead, and the entire street seemed to shrink under a thick, wet blanket with no escape. Inside the white brick house at number 22, Martha Grover paced back and forth in growing panic. The windows creaked under gusts of wind. Lights flickered. Daisy, her chihuahua, cowered in her basket, trembling uncontrollably. Martha had weathered many storms back in Georgia, but this one felt different. more unsettling. There was no one to turn to, no one nearby she could rely on. She rummaged through drawers looking for candles. The power had gone out. The cell signal came and went. As she struggled to pull down the side shutter, a sudden gust of wind ripped it loose and slammed it hard into her arm. "Ah!" Martha cried out. Her arm throbbed in pain and she slipped on the wet porch steps. Her knee slammed against the concrete. She landed hard, soaked through, sprawled across the front stoop with rain pounding down around her. Dizzy, hurting, helpless. She tried calling for help, but the rain and wind swallowed her voice. The neighborhood was silent. Everyone had taken shelter. Everyone except one. Across the street, Mr. Walter sat by his window, watching the sky turn gray. When he saw the flickering light in her window go out, something stirred in him. Then he saw her, Martha, collapsed under the porch, soaked in her red robe, clutching her knee, wincing in pain. He stood up instantly. No time for a raincoat. He pulled on an old knit cap, threw on a heavy coat, and stepped outside. Rain lashed his face, wind howled, but he didn't stop. He crossed the flooded street, shoes soaked, feet slapping through mud puddles. Martha heard the heavy footsteps and blinked up through blurred vision. "Martha, can you hear me?" Mr. Walter's voice cut through the storm, warm, firm. He leaned over her, shielding her from the rain. What are you doing here?" she stammered. "I saw you fall. Don't talk. Let me help." He lifted her gently, one hand steadying her shoulder, the other bracing her injured arm. She was shivering, drenched, too weak to say much. He guided her slowly, step by step, back across the street and into his home. His small wooden house was warmer than she'd expected. Not fancy, but tidy, carefully kept. It smelled of tea, old books, and damp wood. He placed Daisy, shaking and soaked, in a warm basket in the living room. The dog let out a single bark, then curled up quietly once it saw its owner was safe. He settled Martha in a cushioned chair, handed her a dry towel, and fetched antiseptic and gauze from a drawer. "Your knee's scraped, but not broken. It might be a sprain in the arm. I've got a wrap. Rest here. I'll call for medical help when the storm calms." Martha sat still, speechless. She didn't know what to say. She looked at Mr. Walter, the man she had tried to drive out of the neighborhood just days ago, now tending to her wounds with hands trembling from age, but steady with care. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. He didn't look up, just said, "Because you needed help, and I haven't forgotten who I am, no matter what others may think." Simple, but it tightened something deep in her chest. An hour later, the rain eased. The wind softened. The sky remained gray, but the worst had passed. Martha sat in silence, a cup of tea in hand, staring out the rain-streaked window. Across the street stood the porch where she once pointed and shouted, and also the place from which she had been carried when no one else heard her cry for help. "I said awful things," she whispered. "I know," Mr. Walters said with a smile, "but I don't carry them with me. I was wrong. I saw you, but never really looked. I just saw your skin. I was afraid of what I didn't understand." He nodded. "You're not the first, but I believe anyone can change if they choose to." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like dust was finally wiped from a mirror. A few days later, when the sun returned, Martha appeared at Mr. Walter's door with a box of homemade pastries and a simple invitation. "I don't know if you like sweets," she said shyly, "but I made these with gratitude. And an apology." Mr. Walter smiled and took the box. "I like apple pie, but I like sincerity more." From that day forward, neighbors saw a new sight. Two old folks, one black, one white, sitting side by side on the porch, chatting about books, the weather, and things that had never been said before. Some called it reconciliation, but for Mr. Walter and Martha, it was simply understanding, finally beyond skin. It was a crisp, clear morning after the storm. The sky stretched high and blue, as if no thunder had ever swept through the little neighborhood. Birds chirped again on dew-covered branches. Fallen leaves still scattered across the gray stone path, remnants of last night's rain. The air was cool and pure, like rainwater caught from an old tiled roof, the kind of freshness that seemed to exist only in memory. Mr. Walter was watering the plants on his front porch. In his hand was a faded plastic watering can, the water trickling steadily at the base of a jasmine bush, still glistening with morning dew. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if every drop was part of a daily ritual. He kept this habit every morning, as a way to keep his mind from drifting into tangled thoughts and quiet weariness. The iron gate creaked open. It was Martha. She wore a pale cardigan and cradled a small box of cookies wrapped in coarse cloth. Her eyes held hesitation, like someone carrying a truth she didn't yet know how to speak. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost a whisper. "Not at all," Mr. Walter replied with a gentle smile. "Just watering the plants. Come on in." She nodded, stepping slowly onto the porch. They sat on two old wooden chairs, worn smooth by years. Silence fell between them like a thin blanket. She stared into the garden, her gaze far away. He looked at the steaming cup of tea on the table between them. No one spoke until she finally did, very softly. "Thank you for helping me that day." "I just did what needed to be done," Mr. Walter replied, his voice as light as a breeze. She clutched the hem of her sweater. After a moment, she looked up, meeting his eyes. "Do you have children?" The question made him pause for a beat. "No, my wife and we never had our own. But I've had hundreds of students I've thought of as my children." Martha nodded slowly. A heavier silence followed. Then she spoke, voice catching slightly, as if releasing a weight she'd carried alone. "I had one, a son, Jonathan. He used to be my whole world." Mr. Walter didn't interrupt. He just listened. And that silence, not filled with judgment or interruption, was what made Martha finally open up after so many years. "When my husband died, he was the only reason I kept going. I raised him alone since he was 8, worked 2 jobs. I tried everything I could." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "He grew up, went to college, and got married. We drifted apart, but I always thought, no matter what, blood would keep him close." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "The last time he visited me was 2 years ago. He said, 'Mom, you have to change. You can't keep living in fear and trying to control everything.' I didn't understand. I told him he was being rude, ungrateful. He went silent, then walked away, and never came back." Mr. Walters stayed quiet. One hand rested gently on the arm of his chair, not pressing, just waiting. "I sent dozens of texts, called, no answer. His wife blocked me. I lost my son, not to an accident, but because I pushed him away." Martha took a deep breath. Her eyes were wet but steady. "I know I'm not easy to be around. I control, I judge, I see danger in everyone. I thought that was love, that I was protecting the people I cared about. But maybe I was just building walls, not to keep them safe, but to push them out." A light breeze passed over the porch, stirring the leaves like a quiet sigh from the earth. Mr. Walter looked at her, his gaze filled with understanding. His voice was low, grounded. "I once taught a boy angry, resentful, and always pushing back. Everyone was afraid of him, but I wasn't. I looked into his eyes and saw a child screaming because no one listened." He paused, letting the memory come more clearly. "I didn't try to fix him. I just sat there and listened. Slowly, he began to change. Not because of me, but because someone finally saw him. Then one day he came back, hugged me, and said, 'You were the first person who didn't try to change me. You let me find myself.'" Martha sat silently for a long time. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, as if afraid the words might shatter her, "I'm scared. Scared of losing my son. Scared of being hurt. Scared of facing what I've done wrong." "I understand," Mr. Walters said, nodding slowly. "But you came here. You shared this. That, to me, is already great courage." She turned to look at him for the first time. Her gaze was unguarded. No walls, no defense. "I used to think you were a threat, but now you're the first person I've talked to who doesn't make me feel judged." "Maybe," he said with a quiet smile, "because I'm not trying to change you. I'm just listening." Martha laughed, and for the first time her laughter wasn't bitter. It was light, like setting down a heavy backpack that hadn't been opened in years. The afternoon sun gently settled on Mr. Walter's porch. In the worn-out kitchen, the soft clink of a spoon against a white porcelain teacup echoed. Martha sat on a wooden chair, hands wrapped around a hot cup of tea, her gaze softening after a long morning full of confessions. She had just told Mr. Walter about the son who had walked out of her life, about the hurt she hadn't dared to name. And when Mr. Walter didn't respond with advice or judgment, only sat there silently beside her, Martha realized something. She had just reclaimed something she thought was lost: trust. In that quiet moment, as the two sat under the fading light, no more words were exchanged, but the wall between their minds had silently fallen away. Meanwhile, just over 10 miles away, a different world was running on an opposite set of rules. The Northwind Police Department headquarters for the district sat at the heart of a busy administrative zone. The gray concrete building looked like a fortress, with windows lined with bulletproof film and a wall plastered in slogans about integrity, accountability, and respect for the community. Inside, on the 3rd floor, the afternoon patrol unit was gathered as usual. Officer Peter Carson leaned back in his chair, feet up on the desk, flipping lazily through a few case files without actually reading them. His face carried a look of smug satisfaction. The case of the suspicious man in the park had gone off without a hitch. No complaints, no press, no consequences. Just another trophy on his growing list. "They're scared stiff these days," Carson said loudly, unprompted. "All I have to do is step out of the car and stare, and they fold. The South Side kids see me coming and back off real quick." A few other officers chuckled dryly. Some glanced up and then looked back down at their work. No one challenged him. Everyone knew Carson had the chief's backing. His father, William Carson, sat on the 5th floor, the untouchable level. Over the past 10 years, every complaint about the younger Carson had followed the same track: internal review, insufficient evidence, case closed. A cover-up system so smooth it might as well have been public policy. As long as the press stayed out of it, Carson could do whatever he wanted, and he knew it. From the far corner of the room, Leon watched everything. He sat quietly, headphones on, but with no music playing. His fingers tapped slowly on his computer, but his eyes followed every move in the room. Every word, every smirk, every shift in Carson's tone, Leon memorized it all. Ever since Mr. Walter had been ordered out of the park, Leon couldn't shake the feeling that he had been on the wrong side. Not with justice. Not with the man who once pulled him back from the edge. He started keeping notes on every questionable thing Carson did. At first, just minor incidents. Carson pulls over an Arab man just for looking off. Carson threatens a black teen in a hoodie near a basketball court. Carson rough-handling a Latino woman who asked to record their interaction. None of it led to official complaints. Victims were too scared or didn't know how to pursue them. Leon opened a private file on his laptop, separate from the department's internal system. Gargants unrepeated, misconduct/confidentiality/do not tell. Every day he added short, precise entries, complete with dates, times, locations, and involved parties, all encrypted and securely backed up. He told no one, not a lawyer, not the press, not yet, because he knew only when he had enough would a single shot be enough to bring down the predator lurking in the jungle of power. That afternoon, Carson started mouthing off again. "Kids today are all screwed up. This morning I had to pin one little punk against the wall. Talk back to me in the middle of the schoolyard. Had to show him who's boss." Leon looked up from his screen. What did the kid do? Was carrying a box. Didn't explain clearly. Shifty eyes. Was he armed? Not sure. Didn't get to check properly. But I've got the right to search. Handed him over. That's that. Leon stared at him for a long time, then quietly added another line to his file. Day 12. Carson intimidated the student without valid cause. No report filed. No parental notification. He knew what was happening inside this building wasn't just the rot of one man. It was a whole shadow network, held together by fear, silence, and blood ties, and a young officer of color was standing alone. But this time, he wasn't backing down. Late evening. The hallway lights in the precinct flickered. Leon sat alone in the empty office, going over the files he had gathered. A clip from Carson's body cam where he lowered his voice and threatened an elderly woman after she asked, "Why did you pull me over?" A misplaced report. A complaint was filed under the wrong date. Each piece was small, but together they formed a complete picture, and Leon knew just a few more fragments and the truth would step one notch closer to daylight. Night fell over the city like a thick curtain, cloaking the quiet churn of injustice that still moved beneath the surface of everyday life. Inside a small apartment, the dim blue light from a laptop screen flickered across Leon's tense face. A browser window was open, Northwind Police Department's internal complaint archive system. He had just uncovered a detail buried in a report from 2018. Complaint 4.17, filed by Derek Malone. Content: unlawfully detained by Officer Carson while waiting for my wife in the car. Was restrained, searched, and threatened. Conclusion: insufficient grounds for investigation. No clear video. Case closed. Leon recalled a stray comment he'd overheard months ago from a dispatcher. Some old guy called multiple times trying to reopen a case against Carson. Got brushed off. They said no one would believe him. The name Derek Malone flashed again in Leon. The next morning, Leon took half a day off. He told no one at the department. He drove nearly 90 minutes out of the city to a quiet residential neighborhood in South Bend, the last recorded address for Derek. At the end of a quiet street stood a modest white-painted house with a low wooden fence in a yard littered with leaves from the storm. As Leon pulled up, a man in his 60s stepped outside. Salt and pepper hair, eyes sunken but sharp. He placed a hand on his hip, eyeing the unfamiliar car with suspicion. "I don't do sales, and I'm not donating," he barked. Leon stepped out, pulling his badge, not raised, just held. "My name is Officer Leon Brooks, Northwind PD, but today I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm here because of you." Derek froze. His eyes fixed on the badge, then slowly moved to Leon's face. "Northwind? The same department that kneed me in the gut and swept it under the rug like it never happened?" He scoffed. "You're 5 years too late, kid." Leon nodded. "No argument. I know. That's why I'm here. I want to hear your story the way it happened." For the first time, Derek studied him, as if weighing whether the young man before him was worth trusting. After a moment, he opened the gate and grunted, "Come in." They sat in a small but warm kitchen. The wooden table bore a few old cigarette burns. Wedding photos hung on the wall, alongside a framed picture of a boy in a graduation cap. Derek poured coffee, took a drag from his cigarette, and began. "October that year, I was waiting for my wife in the car, parked behind the Maple Central supermarket, just listening to the radio. Carson showed up. No questions. Just told me to step out and face the hood." "Did he give a reason?" Leon asked. "Said I'd been sitting too long in a dark-colored car. Suspicious of possible drug activity." Derek sneered. "I was in a white shirt, driving a 2004 Toyota, with a child seat in the back. All he saw was my skin, and that was reason enough." Leon jotted down every word. Then he asked, "Did you have any evidence back then?" Derek nodded. "Some. After it happened, I called the department's feedback line. They told me I could leave a complaint via voicemail." He stood, walked into the living room, and returned with a small, old voice recorder in hand. "I recorded the call. I knew nobody would believe me. In it, I described what Carson did. There was no body cam, but what I said right after, it's still the truth. Unedited." Leon took the recorder carefully, as if it were a rare artifact. "May I use this? As long as you don't let it vanish like last time." Leon met his eyes. Steady. "I'm not doing this to survive in the system. I'm doing this because I owe someone. And I owe myself." Derek said nothing more, just nodded. On the drive back, Leon played the recording through his headphones. The background was fuzzy, but Derek's voice was clear, shaken, furious. He yelled at me, "Guys like you always got something in the car. Don't think I don't know your type." I was slammed down, wrist twisted, no chance to speak. My wife saw the whole thing. It was witness testimony that the department had never entered into the file. That night, Leon sat at his desk and saved the audio into his encrypted folder. He opened a Word document and typed a new header. File 17. Audio testimony from DM. Regarding misconduct by Officer Carson. Under the soft glow of the desk lamp, he began to transcribe it line by line. His hands trembled, but were steady. He knew it wasn't enough yet to bring Carson down, but it was the first crack in the shield that had protected him for too long. Upstairs at the precinct, Carson had no idea. He was playing cards with 3 other officers, laughing as he bragged about his likely promotion next month. "No doubt. My dad says the votes are already locked in." He laughed loudly, slapping his hand on the table. Down below, Leon shut his laptop and let out a long breath. The night breeze slipped in through the open window. He looked out over the sleeping city and whispered to himself, "Sleep well, Carson, because when you wake up, you won't be where you were." The early winter afternoon dragged on slowly through streets covered in fallen leaves. Leon drove past the old neighborhoods of South Bend, places that looked like time had simply forgotten them. Each house seemed to carry a story no one wanted to tell. He stopped in front of 14 Alder Street. A slanted roof, peeling wooden walls, a crooked fence. A faded sign on the door read, "No solitating, do not disturb." Leon turned off the engine, sat still for a few seconds to steady himself. It had been years, but the name Teresa Miles still sat in the temporarily closed complaint files of the department. He had read her report over and over again, being restrained by Officer Peter Carson while trying to protect her 14-year-old son. The claim was dismissed for lack of clear video evidence, but one note at the bottom had caught Leon's attention. Complainant stated she recorded part of the incident, but did not attach the file. Leon stepped out of the car and knocked on the door. After a few soft noises inside, a black woman in her 40s opened it, her eyes wary and tired. "Police?" she asked, not warmly. Leon wasn't in uniform. He showed his badge, then tucked it away. "Miss Teresa Miles? I'm Leon Brooks. I'm not from Internal Affairs. I'm here today because I believe you—" She frowned. "Believe? Believe what?" "What happened 3 years ago with your son. I'm reopening the Carson case." "On my own?" She said nothing, but her hand relaxed. A minute later, she opened the door. "Come in, but I'm not sure I've got any belief left to give." Inside, the house was plain, quiet, and modest. A worn dining table, a few faded family photos. In one, Teresa posed with a young boy, wide-eyed, thin, with short, curly hair. "Isaiah, that night," she began, her voice trembling, "Isaiah came home late. I called him a dozen times. He said the police were holding him but wouldn't say why. When I got there, Carson had him up against the wall. I pulled out my phone and started filming. Carson came straight at me, smacked my hand, and said, 'You want to disappear from this neighborhood?'" She paused, eyes welling. All she could do then was hold her son's hand and back away from a place that was supposed to feel safe. "I called the department, filed a complaint. No one responded. No one even asked if I had proof." Leon asked gently, "Do you still have the video?" She stood, pulled an old, cracked phone from a drawer, opened the gallery. After a few taps, she handed him a 26-second clip. Blurry, shaky, but clear enough. A uniformed officer stepping toward the camera, voice sharp and threatening. "You want to disappear from this neighborhood?" Leon said nothing. His hand clenched. This wasn't just evidence. It was a silenced voice coming back to life. "Can I make a copy?" he asked, his expression serious. "If you believe this will go anywhere," she nodded. "Then do it." That night, Leon sat at his computer. He extracted the video, placed it into a secure folder. A file No. 21, audio and video of threat against civilian Carson. He added a note. No incident report, no arrest record, no acknowledgement of civil rights. Unlawful detainment, direct verbal threat. He didn't sleep. Near dawn, he called Ramos. "I've got the first video. Clear voice match. She's willing to testify if there's a hearing." Ramos went quiet for a few seconds, then replied, "Then this is the real starting point." The next morning, while Leon was preparing the incident report, a local news outlet published a soft editorial on the stable state of regional policing. One line read, "Recent criticism does not reflect the majority of our force officers who continue serving with dedication to their community." Leon read that line and felt something twist inside. That so-called majority wasn't a measure of right or wrong, and a community couldn't be protected if silence kept being the safest choice. He picked up his phone and called Marla Jennings. "I've got the video. Are you ready for the next step?" The voice on the other end lowered. "Send it to me. But remember, once it leaves your hard drive, there's no turning back." "I'm not looking for a way back," Leon replied. "I'm looking for justice." That night, Marla's first draft about Carson began. The video itself wasn't published in full, but a still frame from the footage, Carson stepping close to the lens, eyes threatening, became the article's lead image. Headline: "You want to disappear from this neighborhood? When police make people want to leave." And within hours, the name Carson no longer lived alone in the dark. It began to burn under the light of a truth once forced into silence. Leon stood alone by the coffee machine in the third-floor break room, eyes fixed on the slow drip of water. It had been 3 days since he got the footage from Teresa, but the heaviness hadn't lifted. Part of it was helplessness, but a bigger part was knowing this: the truth wasn't enough. Not against a system like this. He needed something from the inside, someone close to Carson, or better yet, close to his father. "Did you stay up all night?" The voice behind him was deep, rough, but not unkind. Leon turned. It was Ramos, veteran officer, salt and pepper hair, firm face, broad shoulders, and eyes steady as oak. Ramos wasn't close to anyone at the department. He spoke little, avoided sides, and never showed up at patrol parties or late-night bar hangs. But Leon had always sensed something in him, unspoken. "Pretty much," Leon replied. Ramos walked over, poured himself a cup of coffee, and then leaned against the fridge. "I heard about the footage you got from Teresa Miles." Leon went still. No one else knew about that. Teresa had promised to keep it quiet. No reports, no leaks, no word. "She didn't betray you," Ramos said, as if reading the doubt in Leon's eyes. "But I worked that case when it first happened, then got pulled off it after just 48 hours. Leon looked up, eyes sharpening. "Who pulled you?" "Command. On orders from the chief's office. William Carson." Leon wasn't surprised. But this was the first time someone from inside had said it out loud. Someone who'd been in the closed-door meetings, who'd seen the truth twisted. With just one phone call, Ramos took a sip of coffee, then said quietly, "I used to think staying silent was safer. My wife's sick. I didn't want to lose my job. Didn't want to be cut out. But you're different. You're not afraid. Or at least, you know there are worse things than fear." Leon looked at him with his hard gaze, but was grateful. "I need proof, Ramos. Anything that shows Chief Carson intervened in internal processes to protect his son." Ramos nodded, then said slowly, "I've got some things, but not here." That afternoon, after his shift, Ramos drove to an old storage unit near the closed freight rail yard, where he used to work during his internal affairs days. Inside a rusted metal bin buried beneath dozens of unmarked folders, he found what Leon needed: an internal email that had been recalled right after it was sent, from Ramos J. to Carso DW. Subject: Request to reopen Teresa Miles' case. Initial details don't match. There's a witness. I need more time to verify, at least to recheck the north side camera. Reply from William Carson 3 minutes later. Don't proceed. This matter is closed. Forward to the review team, but no need to log it. Pater showed signs of aggression. Pull from South Bend temporarily. Don't let the press catch wind of the Miles case. Call PR if needed. A screenshot of the internal system showing William Carson's account had permanent deletion privileges for reopened case requests. Ramos gave it all to Leon on a personal USB. No email, no department system. "You need to understand," he said, placing a hand on Leon's shoulder. "What you're up against isn't just a crooked cop. It's a whole machine where power, legacy, and blood are tightly woven." "I know," Leon replied, "but I can't teach my cadets to do what's right if I don't dare to do it myself." Ramos looked at him, and for the first time he smiled. "Then this time, I'm not standing on the sidelines." That night, Leon opened the USB, extracted the files, saved them under File 29, mark equal solving the problem of 00340, published documents, Scan plus email plus screenshot. He knew this was a key piece, not just to show Carson Jr. was guilty, but that Carson Sr. had shielded him using command-level authority, not yet ready for the press, but enough to file with the State Ethics Oversight Board. He opened a new Word file and typed the first line. Summary Report the Carson Case, filed by Officer Leon Brooks, Independent Internal Investigator, Anonymous, per Clause 14.6b. The wind blew in through the window, rustling the curtains. But inside him, the only thing stirring now was a fire of resolve, because after today, the fight would no longer be silent. That morning, sunlight wasn't enough to cut through the early chill. Leon stood at the admin building's coffee counter, holding a red file folder that he and Ramos had spent nearly 3 weeks compiling. No grand title on the cover. Just 3 bold lines, formal request for independent investigation into misconduct and internal cover-up by Officer Peter Carson and Chief William Carson. Ramos joined him, carrying an external hard drive, a full digital backup of the file, over 300 pages. Reports, statements, video stills, audio clips, and recalled internal emails. "This is the hardest hit we've got," he said, "and the system," Leon added, "will it even take the hit?" They entered the ethics board building. The front desk was quiet but not unfriendly. A young staffer named Abby greeted them politely. "Filing an internal review?" she asked. Leon nodded and handed over the folder and drive. "This is a formal submission, requesting an investigation outside of Northwind PD." Abby glanced at the cover, nodded, and signed the intake slip. It all happened quietly, too quietly for what was inside the file, as if the pain, the voices, the truth didn't weigh anything at all. "You'll receive a response within 10 to 15 business days," Abby said, and filed the documents into the pending tray. Leon and Ramos walked out without a word. They didn't expect a miracle, just a chance, a sliver of hope that maybe this time justice would open the door. 13 days later, an email arrived in Leon's inbox. Subject: Case 4811, review outcome. He opened it, scanned the lines, then froze at the final paragraph. After review, the board concludes the submitted evidence is insufficient to establish a pattern of systemic misconduct. Some content may be influenced by subjective bias. Audio and documents lack formal legal authentication. Conclusion: Regest denied. No independent investigation will proceed. Leon threw his phone on the table and bowed his head. Ramos entered minutes later. When Leon told him, Ramos didn't look surprised. He only muttered, "So they're not just deaf, they're silencing anyone who speaks." Leon looked up, eyes red. "We have video, testimony, handwritten notes, internal emails. What more do they want?" Ramos sat down, calm but firm. "It's not that it's not enough, it's that they don't want it to be." They dug deeper. One of Ramos's old friends who had worked in HR at the ethics board confirmed over the phone. "There's a Carson on the preliminary review panel, William's cousin. No voting power, but enough to steer perception. This wasn't a judgment. It was damage control." Leon slammed his hand on the table. "This wasn't just a rejection. It was a rigged system. Then we break the door down. If we can't go through it, we go through the wall." That night, Leon searched. Independent press, police, internal affairs, investigations. The top result was Marla Jennings. He sent an email. "We have everything. The system won't let it out. I need someone willing to do what they won't. Publish it. LL." 2 hours later, Marla called. "I'll meet you tonight." They met at a 24-hour cafe. Marla didn't say much. She looked at the hard drive, then at Leon. "I've written stories that made 3 police chiefs resign, but this one might get me watched." Leon gave a tight smile, eyes sharp. "Then we're the same." 3 days later, her story dropped. Headline: "The Gatekeepers, when internal systems make truth the enemy." The article didn't reveal everything, but it lit a fire. Quotes from Teresa, a still from Jamal's video, part of Ramos's recalled email. For the first time, Carson wasn't a lone name. It came with a question. Why was this case denied, despite credible witnesses? The community responded. Students at the local high school organized a forum. Retired officers wrote open letters supporting Leon. A hashtag began trending, blood-stained file. In the dark, the truth had finally found light. In a small cafe, Ramos and Leon sat side by side, scrolling through the growing wave of comments. "I've never seen anything like this," Ramos muttered. Leon nodded. "Because this time, it's not just us. It's a whole community, tearing justice out from beneath the system's foundations." Cold wind swept through the third-floor hallway of Northwind PD. Leon stood alone by the window, the streetlight outside casting his reflection onto the floor, like a shadow with no escape. The case had been dismissed. Months of effort, evidence, witnesses, testimony, internal records choked out by 3 lines of reasoning and 1 name left unspoken. But everyone knew it. William Carson wasn't just the chief. He was the locked door to a room filled with rot. Ramos approached, handing Leon a black coffee without a word, then sat across from him, hands clasped tightly between his knees. "I used to think I was used to losing," he said after a long silence. "Figured I'd just work until retirement, close the door, let the world go to hell, but now I feel like a coward." Leon didn't answer. He took a sip, and the bitterness hit deep, but his head was no longer spinning with frustration. Everything had gone still, clear, sharp as frost on glass. "We didn't get through the front gate," Leon said. "Then we tear the gate down." That night, in a cafe 15 miles outside the city, Leon met again with Marla Jennings, the investigative journalist who once exposed the white jail scandal in Alabama. Marla was in her 40s, lean, sharp-eyed, voice low and to the point. No pleasantries. She opened her laptop and got straight to it. "I've reviewed everything you sent. This isn't a case of abuse. It's a systematic, organized pattern of cover-up." Leon nodded. "And it was built so no one outside could get to it?" "Wrong," she said. "It was built so those inside would be too afraid to touch it. But you're different. You're inside. And you already started." She slid him a short plan. Phase 1, prepare a special investigative report using Leon's files, with protected witness identities unless they choose otherwise. Phase 2, publish through an independent platform. Launch a coordinated social campaign via citizen networks. Phase 3, apply public pressure to force the ethics board to reopen the case. This time, not behind closed doors. Leon read the plan. Each line was brief but sharp. This wasn't gathering evidence. This was a justice campaign. Over the following days, Marla interviewed witnesses, Teresa, Derek, and even Martha, who had once kept silent but no longer would. She recorded them, asked for consent to go public. Every one of them said yes. One day, she sat down with Mr. Walter on their usual park bench. "I don't think my name will change anything," he said quietly. "But if it keeps some black kid from fearing the police, then use it." Marla squeezed his hand gently. "It's not your name that changes things. It's the way you held on to it when they tried to take it away." Meanwhile, at Northwind PD, the air shifted. People whispered about Leon and Ramos. Some avoided them, some sneered. But a few eyes, quiet, steady, looked at them with a wordless respect. Carson, in contrast, grew erratic, barked unclear orders, suddenly pulled files. Once he smashed a radio after seeing a message circulating in the team chat. "An investigation's coming. Get ready to face the truth." He stormed into the command office and slammed the door shut behind his father. "They're coming back. I know it's Ramos and Leon behind the file." William Carson stayed still, rubbing his chin, eyes cold as steel. "Shut your mouth, Peter. Your job's to keep the station quiet. Outside, I'll handle it. But if the press gets involved, then we hit back. Lawsuit for defamation. I'll make sure that bastard never wears a badge again." Peter nodded, but in his eyes, just for a second, there was something unfamiliar. Fear. 1 week later, the article exploded. Headline in bold, "Truth Buried. Inside the silent investigation of Northwind's most powerful family. Special report." By Marla Jennings. Within 24 hours, it had over 60,000 shares. Online forums lit up. On the ethics board homepage, hundreds of comments demanded a reopened case. A petition gained 10,000 signatures in 2 days. Finally, Under mounting pressure, the ethics board released an emergency statement. Due to community concern and newly surfaced evidence, Case 4827 will be reopened. Chief William Carson will temporarily step down during the investigation. Leon read the line alone in his car, hands trembling, not from victory, but because he knew the real fight had only just begun. Dusk had fallen. The sun dipped behind the red brick rooftops of Maple Grove, leaving a pale orange band along the horizon. Leon walked slowly along the stone path, hands in his coat pockets, head down, no badge, no gun, just a man torn between reason and emotion. He had done everything. Gathered evidence, filed reports, gone to the press, yet the system kept trying to seal it all shut. He needed another voice, someone not on the front line, not in the investigation, not in journalism. He needed Mr. Walter. The old man sat on his porch, cardigan draped over his shoulders, holding a well-worn book. When he saw Leon, he nodded gently, as if he'd known this visit was coming. "Sit down. Take the chair on the left. It doesn't creak when you sit," he said, eyes still on the page. Leon sat. For a while, neither spoke. A light breeze moved through the garden trees. Then Leon said, voice low, almost confessing, "I'm not sure I even know what's right or wrong anymore, sir." Mr. Walter looked up. His eyes were kind, but not soft. "You say that because the case got blocked, or because you feel like you're standing alone?" Leon let out a dry laugh. "Both." Mr. Walter closed the book and set it aside. "Leon, when I was still teaching, I got called to the principal's office 3 times. Why? Because I gave a student a C. His parents said I was biased, unfair. But the truth was the kid was lazy, rude, and couldn't write a full sentence. They wanted a grade. I wanted him to learn. So I got hated for it." Leon listened in silence, absorbing every word. Years later, that same boy came back, in uniform. Said, "If you'd given in to my parents back then, I'd never have known who dared tell me the truth." Mr. Walter looked straight at him. "Justice doesn't come from feeling right. It comes from people who stay grounded, who don't get pulled off course, even when they're hated, even when they stand alone." Leon bowed his head, breathing deeply. "So, even if everyone turns away, I still keep going?" "Not for them," Walter said slowly. "But if you give up, how are you any different from Carson?" A breeze drifted in, carrying the smell of old tea and garden soil. Leon stood up. "I understand now, sir, and I won't stop." Mr. Walter nodded. "Good. But to break a wall of silence, you can't just push. You have to find the crack." The next day, the crack appeared. While scanning local community groups, Leon saw a video going viral. A black high school student shoved by Carson against an iron fence, right in front of classmates. The 40-second clip was grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. Carson's voice barked, "You talking back? Lift that phone again. See what happens." A friend had secretly filmed from a distance, hiding the phone behind a backpack. The clip was posted by an account named @Voices of Southside. Captioned, "Carson again, this time it's my little brother, enough." In 3 hours it had thousands of shares. The community was outraged. Carson's name shot to the top of local searches. Mainstream media took notice. Leon immediately called Marla. "We've got a new case, and this time it's on camera." Marla's reply was lightning fast. "I need the filmmaker's name. From there, we verify time, witnesses, and compare with Carson's record." "I'm on it," Leon said. 3 hours later, he sat across from Jamal King, an 11th grader who filmed the clip. Skinny, fast-talking, glasses on. His mother sat beside him, trembling with anger. "He grabbed my boy by the collar, for nothing, just because he said, 'Why yell?' in front of everyone, and Carson grabbed him like he was a criminal." Leon reassured them and asked permission to use the video. Jamal's mother agreed, eyes red. "If I don't stand up for my son, who will for the others?" Leon took her hand firmly. "I will." That night, Marla published her second exposé. No longer isolated. Carson offends again, even after investigation begins. The article broke down the new incident, embedded the video, and listed the violations. No legal grounds for physical restraint. No on-site incident report. Verbal threat in front of witnesses. It ended with a simple message. If the system won't stop Carson, the community will. And the fire spread. Hundreds of parents signed a petition to suspend Carson. Students staged protests outside the high school. The ethics board, now unable to look away, released a new statement. Formal investigation opened. Officer Peter Carson is suspended pending review. 2 days after the clip was posted, the public backlash surged. The county press office issued a short but powerful release. Due to the severity of ongoing allegations involving 2 Northwind PD officers, the Oversight Committee has launched an expanded investigation. Chief William Carson will be reassigned to an administrative role and removed from leadership during the inquiry. One line. Short, but enough to shake the foundation. Leon read it while sitting on Mr. Walter's porch. He said nothing, just nodded, 'cause he knew to drive darkness away, sometimes all it takes is one light that doesn't blink. The Northwind Police Department building had never been this quiet. The usual echo of boots, sharp orders, and hurried exchanges between shifts had vanished. Peter Carson's arrogant laughter no longer echoed from the break room, and William Carson's commanding shadow was gone from the 5th floor. The floor once seen as the nerve center of every decision in the district. Peter had been officially suspended. William, once able to shift investigative outcomes with a single nod, had been quietly demoted to a temporary admin office with no nameplate, no staff meetings, no visitors, and no cameras. Leon walked down the 3rd-floor hallway, clutching a file nearly the width of his forearm. Not to submit, but to review one last time. He and Ramos had compiled everything. Audio clips, video stills, sworn statements, handwritten notes, recalled emails, internal logs, each thread woven into a system bleeding from within. But as Mr. Walter once said, pushing a wall isn't enough. You have to find the crack. And now, the crack was clear not in documents, but in the quiet fear spreading inside the department itself. Inside the admin room, William Carson could no longer keep his composure. He slammed his coffee mug on the desk, his voice hissing as he read another article resurfacing an old case involving Peter, one they'd once settled cleanly. They won't stop. The press keeps dragging up the clips, the interviews, even the damn kid's school record. He clenched his fists, pounding the desk. Across from him sat a man in a dark suit, no name badge, hardened face, emotionless eye. "You need to stop reacting," the man said. "Stay silent. The media will burn out if there's nothing new." William shot up, eyes bloodshot. "Stay silent? You want me to sit here and watch my career, my family's name turn to ash because some low-rank cop got a taste for internal affairs?" The man didn't respond. He simply looked at William like one might watch a high-rise crumble from termites at the base. That night, Ramos received a call. No caller ID. A calm, steady male voice came through. "I can't go public, but I once worked in the personnel office under the state police chief. I know of at least 3 files on Peter Carson that were halted midway. No record, no trace, all by William's orders." Ramos narrowed his eyes. "Why tell me this now?" The voice replied, "Because this time, they're genuinely scared. This has moved beyond the safety zone. Some are now looking to cut William loose to save the institution. If you and your partner want this to go public, submit the hearing request within 48 hours. No one will be able to stop it." Ramos asked, "Who are you?" The answer was brief. "Someone who tried to sound the alarm from inside." No one listened. "No, I'm letting you do what I couldn't." He hung up, leaving a silence heavier than any threat. Ramos repeated the call to Leon. They sat in an empty conference room, files spread before them, the light dim. Leon nodded slowly. "They're not backing off, because they've seen the truth. They're amputating the infection to save the rest." Ramos nodded back, voice steady, "And that's why we cut deeper." Late that night, Leon opened a private folder and an encrypted file. It was a recording never used before, a phone call from 2021 between William Carson and a former investigations supervisor. William's voice rang cold and clear, I don't care who got arrested by mistake. If anyone tries to reopen the South Bend case, just mention my name. I've already handled it. Leon sat still, gripping his headset. This wasn't just proof of wrongdoing. It was the firewall of power igniting itself to burn everything in its way. He copied the file to a separate USB, labeled it Hearing, Final. The night was quiet, but inside Leon, something had ignited, not hope, a real fire. The fire had reached the hand of power, and now it was time for the entire system to learn what truth feels like when it burns. A cool seasonal wind swept through North Wind's central square, carrying the dry rustle of fallen leaves. In that air, Leon felt an unusual stillness. Not peace, but the kind that comes before a storm. The email arrived Monday morning. The subject line was brief. From the city's legal affairs office. Notice of summons, defamation, and misconduct violation filed by William Carson. The complaint accused Leon Brooks and former internal investigator Ramos of deliberately releasing internal documents without authorization, colluding with the media to harm the reputation of police leadership, causing public unrest and undermining community trust. It demanded Leon's indefinite suspension, revocation of all police credentials, and permanent disqualification from law enforcement across the state. Leon read the filing multiple times. He'd expected retaliation, but not one this large, public, and blatant. No more backroom pressure, no more whispered threats. William Carson had gone fully public, using the law as a blade to sever the credibility of the whistleblowers. Leon picked up the phone and called Ramos. He made his move. No more pretending. Then we don't go soft, Ramos said. This is when they think we'll back down. If we do, everyone who stood with us will fall silent for good. Leon sat at his desk. One hand opened his laptop. The other rested on a printed folder of evidence. Statements, recordings, images, everything prepared across this long road. This was no longer a defense, it was a counterattack. The next day, Leon and Ramos submitted an official response to the state ethics inspector, along with a petition. Request for public hearing with legal representation, media access, and testimony from witnesses involved in the case of cover-up, abuse, and retaliatory action. One line, but behind it stood their last measure of faith in the system. The fallout was immediate. The original lawsuit leaked to the press. Within a day, social media erupted. The hashtag #StandWithLeon began with students from Jamal King's school, then spread to teacher networks, alumni forums, and even retired officers. One anonymous user reposted the video of Carson grabbing the student, captioned, "If they try to silence truth, we'll make the truth louder." In 48 hours, over 35,000 people signed a petition demanding whistleblower protection sent directly to the ethics board and the state governor. Public pressure was no longer background noise. It had become the main volume, echoing through every corridor, every office, every silent decision-making chamber. Then Ramos got a call, a senior legal officer from the Office of the Inspector General, a woman's voice, firm and concise. "I can't speak officially, but I've watched this system long enough. They're about to cut William Carson loose to save the structure, but if you go public with the hearing, they won't be able to block it." Ramos asked, "What can you do?" "I can escalate the hearing proposal straight to the commission chair, and I advise you to act now." That night, Leon sent the final file, evidence, witness statements, and a handwritten letter from Teresa Miles, the mother Carson once threatened. "If Leon hadn't believed me, I might have left this neighborhood forever. No one ever gave me a voice. But now, I won't stay silent. Not just for me, but for all the mothers who were never believed." The letter spread, and something unexpected happened. A bookstore clerk was once interrogated by Carson over a black student, a nurse who witnessed Peter Carson berate a black patient. One by one they messaged reporters, "If there's a public hearing, I'll speak." A week later, the state inspector's office issued a formal announcement. A public hearing will be held at North Wind Administrative Court, Hearing Room 3, Monday the 27th at 9:00 a.m. It ended with, "Any individual with relevant experience or involvement may apply to testify." Leon read the notice by his apartment window. Sunlight fell across the old brick wall. illuminating the table where he'd placed one file folder. Its cover read, handwritten in black ink, "The door is unlocked. If someone dares open it." Ramos walked in from the back, coffee in hand. "Monday, face to face." Leon nodded. "You ready?" Ramos looked out the window, his eyes steady. "We've come from the edge. Now it's either they fall or we pull justice up from the cliff." Leon clenched his fist and placed it on his chest, not from fear, but because for the first time he wasn't afraid at all. Something was different at the Northwind government building that morning. Gone was the smug stillness of a place used to hiding what should be seen. Outside, a long line of people waited to enter the public hearing, a rare event for a case involving internal police affairs. News cameras pointed straight at the front doors. Independent reporters jostled beside mainstream media. Inside, tension hummed like a high wire. No one spoke loudly. No one dared to laugh. Every move felt measured because everyone sensed that today something irreversible would unfold. Leon Brooks walked through the main doors without a badge or uniform. Just a man, once silent, once part of the system, now stepping toward a tribunal once filled with people who called him brother. Beside him was Ramos, in a dark suit carrying a neatly bound file. They no longer represented an institution, they stood for what was right. 3 administrative judges sat at the center of the hearing hall. On one side, Leon and Ramos. On the other hand, the defendants, William and Peter Carson, flanked by their legal counsel. The presiding judge tapped the gavel, voice calm but commanding. "This public hearing is convened at the request of the State Ethics Oversight Committee and with agreement from the Inspector General's office. Subject: allegations of abuse of power, cover-up, and ethical misconduct by Chief William Carson and Officer Peter Carson." The room fell still. All parties may present, rebut, and submit evidence and witnesses. This hearing is being recorded and will be made public. William Carson spoke first. He avoided eye contact with Leon or Ramos. His voice was measured, low, but his eyes had lost their certainty. "I have served in law enforcement for over 30 years. I'm not perfect, but I've always put public trust and stability first. These accusations rely on speculation, biased interpretation, and, unfortunately, are amplified by irresponsible media coverage." Peter Carson followed, shoulders slumped, lips dry, eyes unsteady. "I followed procedure. I never hit anyone. The incidents are being exaggerated. I don't understand why this has escalated so far." Their lawyer added, "The plaintiffs leaked confidential information to the media, violating department policy and committing reputational harm. We request the hearing be dismissed due to tainted motives." One judge turned to Leon. "Mr. Brooks, your response." Leon stood, gaze steady on the tribunal. "I didn't sell anyone's reputation. I'm here to return a voice to those who were forced into silence." He placed a USB on the table. "I request to play an internal audio recording previously unreleased. A 2021 phone call in which William Carson instructed an investigator to halt the South Bend case and warned staff not to pursue it." The file played. The room held its breath. "I don't care who got arrested. Wrong. Anyone who tries reopening South Bend, mention my name. I already handled it." The defense protested. They requested a pause to verify the recording's legality. Denied. "Proceed," said the judge. Leon scanned the room. "I'm no longer a police officer, but I'm still the son of a mother who taught me to stand up when others are being pushed down. I was once the student of a man who said, 'Justice has no color, only light or shadow.' Today, I choose the side with light." The presiding judge paused. "Are there any witnesses who wish to testify?" Silence. Then a hand rose in the second row. Teresa Miles. "I want to testify," she said, voice shaky but clear. "I reported Officer Carson's abuse. I was ignored, threatened, but Leon believed me. That's why I'm here today." She submitted a video, brief but clear. Peter Carson approached her, saying, "You want to disappear from this neighborhood." Next, Derek Malone stood, voice low but unwavering. "I was pulled from my car for no reason. I'm a middle-aged man wearing a button-down, waiting for my wife. Carson called me suspicious. William Carson buried my complaint. That was 10 years ago. But I'm still here to tell it." Ramos stood and detailed the investigative interference. recalled emails, top-down orders, and cases closed before review. Then Jamal King, the high school student, took the stand. Young face, firm voice. I didn't need Carson to teach me the law. I needed a cop who knew who he was talking to. Carson grabbed my collar. Leon held out a hand when I was shaking. Now I know who to trust. Then another stood, then another. A woman who saw it happen in a supermarket. A cafe owner was once threatened with a bogus inspection. The wall of silence cracked. One voice, then another, like water breaking through after a decade of pressure. At the end of the testimony, the judge spoke solemnly. The board finds sufficient evidence to determine Officer Peter Carson engaged in repeated procedural misconduct and inappropriate use of force. Chief William Carson interfered with investigations, concealed misconduct, and intimidated subordinates. These actions violate departmental ethics and warrant federal-level accountability. A moment of silence. Then the ruling was read. Effective immediately, William Carson and Peter Carson are stripped of all law enforcement authority. The case will be forwarded to the Federal Inspector's Office for potential criminal investigation. The room erupted, not with shouts, but with applause. Not loud, not frenzied, but eyes lit up, as if witnessing something real after years of pretense. Outside, a soft rain began to fall. Leon stood beneath the awning, watching people file out with quiet smiles. Mr. Walter approached, holding an old umbrella. "You pushed that door open, Leon." "No," Leon said. "I just removed the lock. The ones who opened it were everyone who'd been silenced." Walter smiled, hand on Leon's shoulder. "You just made sure the next generation won't have to stand outside like we once did." Leon looked up at the sky. That door, once thought sealed, was open now, and no one would lock it again. South Bend didn't change much after the public hearing. There were no banners on the streets, no speeches on television praising those who helped take down an entire system, but in the city's quietest corners, the small park, the police station hallway, the fence at house number 22, something had changed. The air, the glances, the rhythm of footsteps, and most of all, the people who returned not with fanfare, but with quiet presence. Early in the morning, Mr. Walter still sat on the third bench in the park. In his hands, a thick book with a worn spine. The same old canvas bag was by his feet. The same small birds flew in when he pulled out his usual breadcrumbs. But today, someone stood in front of him, hesitant, gripping an envelope. A white man, around 30, in a faded blue shirt. Nervous eyes, but steady feet. "Are you Mr. Browning?" Mr. Walter looked up and nodded gently. His eyes were soft, but sharp, like they could see through time. "I'm Nolan Fisher, Dr. Fisher's son. I was in 11A back in 2008. I was the kid who got suspended for fighting." Walter blinked, then nodded slowly, retrieving a distant image. "You skipped class to spray graffiti in the restroom?" "Yes, but you were the only one who didn't yell at me. You kept me after class and made me write, 'Kindness doesn't need to be painted on walls to be seen,' 20 times." Walter chuckled. "You came back for that?" Nolan shook his head and handed over the envelope. "I came back because today I'm a student teacher, and I tell my kids the same sentence you made me write." "I didn't make you write it," Walter said. "I taught you." "Yes." Nolan nodded, eyes lowered. "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on someone like me." After Nolan left, Walter sat holding the book, still unopened. A smile played at the corner of his lips. He remembered writing that sentence on a weary day when the class was loud and no one seemed to listen, a sentence that now lives again, passed down by someone else. South Bend was still small, still modest, but like an old clock few paid attention to, it kept ticking, reminding everyone that time moved forward and the world did change, slowly, quietly, but truthfully, and that change began with those who stood up, even if only with a sentence, a reminder, or a park bench. Elsewhere, near South Bend High, Teresa Miles, the mother once threatened for protecting her child, stood in the school courtyard. She wasn't a guest or a chaperone. She was now part of the parent council, invited to speak at the opening discussion on civil rights and the relationship between families, schools, and school police. When her turn came, she stepped forward with no paper, no notes. I used to think I didn't have a voice, that being poor, not wearing a suit, and not driving a fancy car meant my voice was smaller. But I've learned volume doesn't define voice. Courage does. From the seats below, Jamal, her son, watched silently. He didn't know when the tears started. Each day, a little more, those once pushed to the edges stepped closer to the center. Angela Rivera, the internal affairs officer once reassigned for refusing to delete Carson's access logs, was reinstated as the lead investigator in a police reform task force. Her first proposal: no complaint case may be closed without a signature acknowledgement from the involved civilian. A small rule, but like a wedge in a door long sealed shut. In the Maple Grove neighborhood, once a hot spot of tension between Mr. Walter and Martha, the air felt changed. Martha, the woman who once called the police on Walter for the color of his skin, now led the local elders support and garden care group. She went door to door, inviting people she once never greeted. One Saturday morning, she brought a basket of cookies to Walter's porch. She didn't knock, just placed it on the table and sat beside him. I don't know if I deserve it, but I want to learn how to be kind, not just correct. Walter looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Better late than never. Since then, every Monday evening, the two walked together through the park. Martha, once prejudiced, became the first to enroll in Generations Connect, a program where the elderly and young shared stories unfiltered by race or assumption. Leon, once the eye of the storm, now lived more quietly than ever. He turned down TV interviews, awards, and even honorary invitations from police academies. He accepted only one: to speak in a local community college class on ethics in law enforcement. When he arrived, the classroom held just 12 students. No cameras, no recordings. Standing before a blank board, no slides, Leon said, "I'm not here to tell a story of victory. I'm here to say justice doesn't come from winning, but from refusing to lose." A student asked, "Do you regret it? Going against the system?" Leon paused, then said, "I didn't go against the system. I reminded it that it was built to protect people, not itself." The class was silent. No one wrote anything down, but no one looked away. Ramos, now retired, lived in a small house on the outskirts. He rarely checked his email, but once a week he sent a handwritten letter to Leon. In one, he wrote, "I used to think retreat was survival, but you gave me a reason to step back into the fight. Even once, and I know, if I had to again, I'd still choose to stand beside you." Leon kept that letter in a drawer, beside an old notebook. On its cover, "Why I Started and Why I Won't Stop." A week after the hearing, Mr. Walter received a package, a pale yellow envelope with no sender's name. Inside, a letter and a photo. The photo showed a classroom from 2004. Mr. Walter stood at the board, chalk in hand, students laughing. The letter, written neatly, read, "Mr. Walter, I'm Jonathan Bell, 10B that year. I moved away after the first semester. Never had the chance to say thank you. I was the kid who stole snacks from the canteen. You didn't expel me. You made me write an apology. But more importantly, you said, I don't need you to be perfect. I need you not to give up on yourself. Today, I'm a student services assistant at a community college in Indiana. I teach kids how to write letters, and I tell them, one kind letter can change a life. Thank you for not giving up on a troublemaker. I never forgot you, Jonathan." Walter read slowly. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter. Something moved in his eyes. Not tears, but a memory returning, soft as early rain. But this time, he wasn't alone. Every day now, an old student dropped by, a neighbor smiled, or a child sat beside him and asked, "Sir, how do you know if you're doing the right thing?" He didn't answer right away. He just smiled and said, "If you're asking that question, you're probably already on the right path." A month after the public hearing, the name Leon Brooks was no longer confined to a small police department in South Bend. He had become a focal point, a reluctant symbol. From major news programs to online discussion forums, from social media to law enforcement academies, people called his name as the living face of a new era of justice. And yet, as the spotlight turned toward him, Leon quietly stepped back from the light. He declined national talk show appearances. He skipped the Indiana Civil Rights Association's recognition ceremony, even when asked to participate in a documentary series on breaking the silence within the force. His only response was, "Justice doesn't need a lens. It needs witnesses." Elsewhere in the city, the oak doors of the Lakeside estate had remained closed for weeks. Inside, William Carson, the former chief of Northwind Police, had vanished from public view. Since his dismissal and revocation of command, no one knew where he went, what he did, or how involved he still was. But in a leaked email quickly picked up by reporters, Carson had written, "I'm the only one in 3 decades who understood how to run the system like a machine. If they want to replace me, they'll have to rebuild the entire engine, and no one has the guts to do that." According to internal sources, Carson had sent a series of memos to remaining leadership figures, urging them to maintain operational discipline and avoid emotional responses in command structures. The wording was subtle, but the message was clear. He still sought to influence the system, even without a title. Peter Carson, his son, the man whose actions had become the face of institutional failure, remained silent in a different way. After the accusations, the student assault footage, and the public outrage, Peter erased his online presence and ignored all interview requests. Rumors claimed he'd left the state. Others said he was preparing to sue the press for defamation, but the rumors died as quickly as they surfaced. No one cared what he did next. He no longer represented a person, but a warning sign of what law enforcement had hidden for too long. A former training partner of his said bluntly in a professional forum, he was the product of a system that only taught the exterior. Once it cracked, there was nothing inside. Through all this, Leon stayed in his small apartment downtown, where he had once pored over documents, filed reports, and tracked every witness statement in the Carson case. The room remained unchanged, but the desk was now clear. No files, no drives, just one notebook, its cover faintly embossed, "Remember why you began." He opened it and added one line, "Justice doesn't end with a hearing. It begins when people stop being afraid to tell the truth." That Monday morning, he sat in a quiet cafe, scrolling through emails. Under the high priority tag was a message from Civil Reform Now, a well-known civic media group. "We are honored to invite Leon Brooks as the face of our Rebuild Justice campaign. Media package includes 8-part documentary series, national talk show appearances, branded apparel collaboration, book publishing and licensing, public tour across 6 major cities." The closing line read, "You've been the voice. Now be the face." Leon paused. He wasn't surprised. He knew this moment would come. What troubled him was how quickly it came before people truly understood why he had done what he did. He typed a short reply, "I don't need to be the face. I just want to keep the voice. Thank you." Then deleted the rest of the emails with similar offers. That afternoon, Marla Jennings, the journalist who had walked beside him throughout, called. Her voice held a trace of frustration. "You're wasting a chance to amplify what you started. You could use this momentum to pressure real reform." "I know. Then why the silence?" Leon paused. "Because I don't want justice to become a brand, and truth doesn't need a logo." Marla chuckled softly but said nothing more. She understood, but she also mourned it. In a world that distrusts heroes, Leon was one of the few who refused to become a symbol, who wouldn't sell his soul to the stage. That evening, as Leon walked through Mr. Walter's old neighborhood, he noticed the new street lamps. Small string lights now hung from the old oak tree, casting a gentle glow across the street. A child riding a bike stopped, recognizing him. "Are you the guy from TV?" Leon nodded. "Maybe. My mom says you're brave. Were you scared?" Leon paused. He looked at the boy. Curly hair, clear brown eyes. "Yes, but brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are." The boy nodded and rode off. Leon kept walking. The lantern light reflected on his jacket like little embers, each one a quiet reminder of those who had stood behind him throughout, though none had worn a name tag. On Thursday morning, Leon was invited to a private discussion at the State Security Academy, where recruits were being trained. No press, no live stream. Just 20 students were seated in a semicircle in a small lecture hall. Leon wore no uniform, no badge, only a handwritten name tag, Leon B., former officer. He'd been invited by Dana Owens, a young instructor, once the insider who leaked Carson's logistics files. They need to hear you, not polished, just the truth. Leon brought no speech, just a photocopy of the first complaint he ever wrote and once tore up. He didn't open with a theory. He told stories of watching Carson shove a homeless man down a staircase, of the first mother who came to him for help, and how all he could do was lower his eyes, of believing silence was safer, because that's what he'd been told. The class was silent. No one took notes, but no one looked away. One student, about 21, raised his hand. If you could go back to the moment you stayed quiet, what would you change? Leon thought, then said quietly, I wouldn't apologize for not shouting. I'd apologize for thinking silence was harmless. Another student, a young woman, stood. Do you ever feel betrayed by the institution you believed in? Leon looked at her, then shook his head. I never loved the institution. I loved the reason I joined, and that reason still matters. The class gave him a standing ovation. Not the kind given to motivational speakers, but one born from gratitude. Gratitude that this man had dared to lose a battle to win back their trust. As Dana walked him to the door, she handed him a note from a student. Thank you for not becoming a badge. Thank you for staying human. Leon didn't read it immediately. He tucked it into his coat, walking slowly to his car. The sky was gray, but it didn't rain. That was enough. A quiet morning that held all the hope he feared had been lost. That afternoon, Leon visited Mr. Walter. The sky was overcast. Wind brushed gently through the oak trees. Walter sat on his porch, hands resting on his knees, eyes distant as if listening to a song from long ago. Leon placed 2 cups of tea on the old wooden table, then sat beside them. I went to the academy today, Leon said. I never thought I'd return to a classroom, someone worth listening to. Sometimes listening teaches more than years of training, Walter replied, not turning. A leaf drifted down, brushing the rim of the teacup. I'm scared, Leon admitted. Scared that if I stop standing on stages, if I don't become a voice for change, then everything I did will be forgotten. Walter turned to him, smiling gently. Do you know why teachers never need to be honored? Leon shook his head. Because our job is to plant, not to harvest. Goodness doesn't need the lead role. It just needs to outlast the wrong. Silence. 2 men are sitting under the old tree. One had walked through life teaching. One was learning to teach again. Not with chalk, but with choices. Before Leon left, Walter handed him a worn leather notebook. Inside were handwritten notes. Day X. A student who skipped 3 days returned to class and said, I'm sorry. Day Y. A parent who once demanded a school transfer sent a thank you letter for not expelling her son. Day Z. A boy once considered hopeless wrote to say he passed the police exam. At the very end was one final line. We never know what part of us will remain with someone else, but if we hold on to kindness, what remains will always be right. Leon held the notebook. You wrote this for yourself? No, Walter said. I don't need reminders. I wrote it so those who come after won't forget. That night, Leon opened his laptop, switched on Do Not Disturb, and began to write. Not a complaint, not a report, a manuscript. The journey isn't from silence to speech. It's from doubt to conviction. I don't have the right to become a symbol, but if I can do anything, it's to help others see that you don't need power to start change. You just need not to look away, he wrote without pause. No edits, just the weight of what had lived inside him for a year left as a record. For anyone stepping into the profession he once loved, once doubted, and still chose to walk beside. A week later, that manuscript wasn't published. It wasn't broadcast. It didn't go viral, but it was passed hand to hand through training rooms under a quiet title, Notes from Someone Who Chose Not to Look Away. Leon now worked at a small community legal aid office. No big nameplate, no private office, but every day he helped someone rewrite their story not with words, but with justice. On the third bench in the park, Mr. Walter read a new notebook hands still trembling. Martha sat beside him, knitting. A child cycled past, laughing. No photos, no live streams, but in that space, justice was no longer a printed word. It was present. It was footsteps that didn't turn away. It was a teacher who needed no spotlight. It was a former officer who needed no badge. And it was light, still shining, even after the stage lights dimmed. Autumn had just arrived. The morning sunlight was no longer harsh, but as gentle as a thin blanket draped over the old town streets. Mr. Walter was watering a few small flower pots on his porch when he heard a soft voice calling from across the street. "Mr. Walter, wait for me a moment." It was Marta, the woman from house number 22. She held a cloth bag of cookies, a cardigan draped lightly over her shoulders, her softly curled hair tousled by the wind. He walked over slowly, no longer with the same brash and judgmental manner as before. Mr. Walter looked at her and nodded slightly. Over the past few months, they had grown used to each other's presence, as neighbors on the same street, the same age, having weathered some of the same storms of time. But today, something was different in her expression. Not curiosity, but nervousness. "May I invite you over for a while?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. Mr. Walter hesitated, not out of surprise, but because he sensed the significance behind her invitation. A woman who once called the police on him because of his skin color, who once eyed him with groundless suspicion, now invited him into her home. This was more than a visit. It was a shedding. "All right," he said simply. "I'm curious what your house looks like." Martha chuckled softly. It was the first time he heard her laugh without sharpness. House number 22 looked no different from outside. Neat, tidy, every inch seemingly measured. But inside it bore the air of someone who had lived alone for too long. Everything was so quiet it felt awkward. On the walls were small frames, mostly of landscapes or mass-produced prints. But in a cabinet corner stood the only photo with people, a young man next to a boy of about 10. The photo was old, slightly faded. Martha placed her hand on the frame while pouring tea. "That's my son," she said, her voice like a wisp of smoke. Mr. Walter didn't ask anything. He knew some pains didn't need probing. Only the right moment to be shared. "I invited you over because I think it's time I told this to someone who won't judge me," Martha said. "Someone I once judged." Mr. Walter nodded. He didn't need to play therapist. Just a kind, silent listener. Martha poured him tea and sat across from him. The house remained quiet. But between the two of them, a door had been opened. The room was filled with the scent of chamomile tea and a hint of cinnamon from the pastry on the table. Martha sat upright, but her hands were clasped beneath the table, an unconscious gesture of someone trying to stay calm. "I was born in Georgia," she began. "A small town, lots of cornfields, lots of churches. People didn't talk about racism there because everyone was the same, or at least they thought so." Mr. Walter nodded slightly. He knew that kind of place. Peaceful on the surface, but the air was thick with guardedness. "My father was strict, in a traditional way. He didn't teach me to hate, but he never taught me to understand those different from us. And so I grew up believing that what I saw was right and anything different was suspicious." Martha paused to pour more tea. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes no longer avoided his. "I got married at 21, a man in banking. We had a son, Caleb. He was my whole world." The wind outside drifted in through the window. The rustling leaves seemed to carry back a memory. "Caleb was different from me. He loved music, art, and hung out with friends who weren't like him, people of color, immigrants, and even gay friends. I didn't object, but I didn't support either. I told him to be careful. He said I didn't understand his generation, and he was right." She pressed her lips together. Mr. Walter didn't interrupt. He knew the wave was near. One day, when he was 23, he told me that if I couldn't accept his friends, then I couldn't accept him either. I didn't answer, and he left. I haven't seen him since. That final sentence cut like a wound she inflicted on herself. "Do you know why I feared people like you?" Martha looked straight into Mr. Walter's eyes. "Not your skin color, but because you reminded me of what I lost because I refused to learn a new way to live." Silence. That sentence wasn't an excuse. It was the raw truth, a truth Martha had never dared speak even to herself. Mr. Walter set his teacup down. "I understand. I don't blame you, Martha. But if you're willing to change, Caleb is still within you." Martha's first tear fell onto her sleeve. Nothing grand, but not small either. She took a tissue from her sleeve and slowly wiped her tears. She didn't frantically apologize, nor did they try to ease the moment. She was silent for the first time, not from defensiveness, but from acknowledgement. Mr. Walter leaned back slightly. His eyes held a distant look. Then he began. "I once taught a senior class. There was a boy named Marvin. The kind every teacher dreads. Rebellious, rude, always challenging authority." Martha smiled faintly. Not because it was funny, but it reminded her of how others had described her son. "One day I kept Marvin after class for writing a nonsense essay. I planned to scold him, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw exhaustion, not from school, but from being abandoned." Mr. Walter paused, as if revisiting his younger self. I asked, "What is this essay about?" He said, "About someone no one understands." I asked, "Who is that?" He replied, "Me." Martha looked at him, eyes absorbing something deeper than words. At that day, I didn't grade it. I told him to rewrite it. But this time I said, "Write it for someone you think will never read it." "And did he rewrite it?" Martha asked. "Yes." He nodded. A week later, he submitted a letter. Not an essay, a letter to the father who had abandoned him. Mr. Walter looked toward Martha, his voice slower. "I kept that letter for years, not for its content, but after writing it, Marvin began to listen. He studied harder, not perfect overnight, but changed. Little by little. Where is he now? A teacher for troubled teens, and someone who sends me flowers every Teacher's Day." Silence. Martha smiled lightly, her eyes red. "Funny, I used to fear kids like that, but you saw them as the ones most worth holding on to." Mr. Walter didn't answer right away, then he quietly said, "Because I was once one of them." That sentence, simple but weighty, made Martha look at him differently. For the first time, she saw not an elderly black man, not a potential threat imagined in her mind. She saw someone who had erred, been misunderstood, forgiven, and had spent the rest of his life giving that back to others. Martha stood, walked slowly to the window. She looked out over the neighborhood, once a place of sameness, of one kind of people, one kind of life. She called peaceful. But today, after this conversation, she knew that wasn't peace, it was limitation. "I once told Caleb, I'm not prejudiced, I'm just cautious. But now I see, that was prejudice, wasn't it?" Mr. Walter didn't answer immediately. He let the question hang like a mirror. "I used to believe that as long as I didn't hate anyone, didn't say cruel words, I was kind. But I never stood with those who were hurt, I just stood outside." Martha sighed. Mr. Walter spoke gently. "Silence in the face of injustice is sometimes no different from helping it." She nodded, clutching the strap of her cardigan. "I thought I'd lost Caleb because he was too different from me. But really, I lost him because I didn't dare to change myself." Silence drifted like a blanket over two people no longer opposed. Only the naked truth of things, long left unsaid. "Mr. Walter," Martha turned back, "if you were me, what would you do?" He lifted his cup, took a small sip, and said, "I'd start again, not with Caleb, but with anyone who crosses my path today. Forgiveness doesn't need confirmation, just a different way of living." Martha smiled gently, not fully, but for the first time, peacefully. The next morning, Mr. Walter returned to the park as usual, but within half an hour, Martha approached, holding a cream envelope and a handkerchief embroidered with a C. "I rewrote the letter I never dared send to Caleb," she said, placing the envelope in his hand. "I'm not sure I'll send it, but at least I want you to be the first to read it." Mr. Walter opened the letter and read slowly. "Caleb, I lost you not because you left, but because I didn't dare to hold on to you the right way. I'm sorry for choosing comfort over understanding. I'm sorry for letting the silence grow between us. But today, I don't write to pull you back. I write to say, I understand. And if you ever return, I'll be the first to open the door." Finishing, Mr. Walter folded the letter and returned it. His eyes didn't offer praise, only recognition. "I hope I can start over," Martha whispered. "You already have. he replied. They sat on the bench. No more words, no need for them. The sky was clear, sunlight filtering through the leaves. A child rode by, stopped his bike, and greeted them politely. "Good morning, sir, ma'am." Martha smiled, waved back, and in that moment she knew. Life doesn't need to erase the past to begin anew. It just needs someone brave enough to admit they were wrong and choose to live differently from there. 3 weeks after the echoes of the hearing had faded, Leon received an invitation from the State Department of Internal Affairs. This time, it wasn't to testify or provide documents. They invited him to join the Sector Reform Council, a well-known advisory board that had never truly achieved meaningful change. At the preliminary meeting, a director spoke to Leon in a cordial tone. "We need you to be the symbol of reform, a voice from within." Leon didn't respond immediately. He looked around the carpeted conference room with its wall slogans reading, "Modernize the system, connect with the community." Not a single regular citizen sat at that round table. Everyone wore suits. "Thank you for the invitation," he said, "but I don't think I'm suited for a symbolic role." Another person interjected, "We understand your hesitation, but if you're not at this table, do you even have a voice?" Leon gave a faint smile. Justice doesn't need a big table. It needs someone who can sweep the dust from beneath it. That evening, Leon handwrote a letter, not to the council, but to Dana, the instructor at the security academy. "I declined the advisory role, but I have another proposal. A dialogue program between the older generation, those who lived through silence, and the younger generation, those brave enough to speak up. I know someone who can lead it. Not me, Mr. Walter L. Browning." 2 days later, a response came. "We agree. If Mr. Walter accepts, the program will launch in 3 weeks at South Bend Park." Leon took the letter and walked slowly toward the old brick house at number 17. When Mr. Walter opened the door, Leon simply handed him the envelope, saying nothing. "Someone else wants me to speak again?" Mr. Walter asked, half joking. "Not to be a speaker," Leon smiled, "but to do what you've always done best, listen before you speak." A week later, the pilot program named The Third Bench was announced. Each session, Mr. Walter would sit with 2 or 3 high school students to discuss questions not found in textbooks. What do you do if your friend is prejudiced? When should you be silent and when not? How do you know you're right when everyone thinks you're wrong? Organizers expected only 10 attendees for the first session, but more than 50 applied. Leon reviewed the list and looked at Mr. Walter. "You don't need a speech." "I never have." Mr. Walter grinned. The first session of The Third Bench took place on a Saturday morning, under a clear blue sky. Beneath the old oak tree in South Bend Park, Mr. Walter sat holding a small brown notebook. There was no podium, no loudspeaker, no recording, just a simple circle of 8 plastic chairs and 12 high schoolers of various ethnicities, ages, and personalities. Leon stood at a distance, uninvolved. He wanted the conversation to unfold naturally, free from the whistleblower label the media had stamped on him. Today, the spotlight belonged to someone who never needed applause, only the right moment to listen. Mr. Walter began with a gentle question. "Has anyone here ever felt misunderstood, but didn't know how or couldn't explain why?" Many hands rose. A girl named Kiara said, "I've been labeled aggressive because I speak out against injustice at school. But I'm not angry, I just refuse to accept it." A boy named Hugo added, "I'm called antisocial because I avoid school events, but really, I just don't feel safe." Mr. Walter nodded, his eyes scanning each of them as if memorizing their stories. Then he said, "I've taught thousands of students, and what I've learned is emotions aren't wrong, it's how we express them that causes misunderstanding." One student asked, "So how do we keep people from misunderstanding us?" He replied, "Truthfully, there's no guaranteed way. But one thing works better than explanation: consistency. If you do what's right every day, eventually they'll have to believe you." The atmosphere warmed. Students asked more. "Have you ever stayed silent when you saw something wrong?" Mr. Walter nodded slowly. "Yes. And every time I lost a part of myself." A white girl with purple-dyed hair asked quietly, "Do you think someone like me has the right to speak up? I'm afraid people will call me fake." Mr. Walter looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You have the right. But more than that, you have the responsibility. Not because you're white, but because you're human." The circle fell silent for a few seconds. Then someone whispered, "That was beautiful." As the sun rose higher, a normally quiet student named Luis raised his hand. "What if justice never comes?" The question made Mr. Walter pause. He set his notebook down, folded his arms. "When I was young, I thought justice was a courtroom. Then I thought it was a law. But now I believe justice is in the daily choices we make, when we do what's right, even if no one praises us. Justice doesn't come late. It comes through every right action, even when no one sees it." Luis nodded, saying nothing more, but his eyes were brighter, as if that answer had untied something within. The conversation ran an hour longer. When it ended, no one wanted to leave. They lingered, shared contact info, and recalled phrases that stuck with them. No one called it a class, but clearly, everyone had learned something. Leon left quietly, unnoticed, but he knew something real had just begun, not in a courtroom or forum, but in the heart of a circle, beneath the shade of an old tree.